just connecting us to where we were last week, I want to just let people know that we have a childcare snafu in my house this morning. So I'm going to end about 7 or 10 minutes early. So we'll end about 8:50 or a few minutes after. Everybody has 9 a.m. this morning. So, and we have, there are 2 of us and 1 of her. And anyway, good morning. Nice to see everybody. We are going to start where we ended last time, which is the final Mishnah in Berakhot. Just as a reminder, some of you caught the end of the conversation we were just having. We're talking about the Shaliach Tzibor and what happens when the Shaliach Tzibor either isn't doing, I say his job because that's what we're talking about, but his or her job as we, as he understands it, or is expected to be. And also just some sort of general, ways that we handle the Shaliach Tzibor and how the Shaliach Tzibor handles him or herself. So we're on the final Mishnah, 5:5. Here we go. And just to say, we had this conversation last time about what is the function of a Shaliach Tzibor? How is it different now than it used to be? Things like that. And I think that this conversation is going to be similar. And so we won't belabor the point. Let's just say that. Okay. Hamit palel v'ta'a, siman ra lo. Siman is a sign. Maybe you've heard that word before. That it's a siman ra is like a bad sign. Ve'im shaliach tzibor hu siman ra l'sholchav mipnei l'shulcho shel adam kamoto. So let's just start there. One who is praying and makes a mistake, it is a bad, maybe even more than that. Maybe not even just bad, but it's a bad sign for him. So like, I don't know, something bad might happen to him, or maybe his prayers aren't real, or we can talk about what that might mean. And if he is the messenger of the congregation, i.e. the prayer leader, it is a bad sign for those who have sent him because one's messenger is equivalent to oneself. I love that line personally. I think about that a lot, especially when I'm teaching in the room of my teachers, right? Sometimes you can get a little bit nervous when you're teaching in the room of your teachers. People who have sent you, quote unquote, right? I definitely have mentors who have taught me how to lead prayer. And when you're in their presence, you think to yourself, oh, I really hope I don't mess this up, right? Because it's kind of like in their name that you are standing there. So if one makes a mistake, it's a bad sign for him. And if the messenger and if he's the messenger, if he's the prayer leader of the congregation, and he's been sent by the congregation. So you imagine that, these people trained each other, right? So you imagine that often you're in the room of your teacher because it was this one community and you would train one another and people didn't move around as much as maybe we do now. Like my teacher right now is in Australia, right? That was probably pretty uncommon, at least one of my teachers. So if he's the messenger of the congregation, he's been sent by the community, it's a bad sign for those who have sent him because the messenger is essentially being represented. Thoughts? Okay, pretty straightforward. Yeah, Irene.
Where's there room for error?
Right, where is there room for error? Well, you remember that we learned in the last one that when he makes a mistake, he's moved to the side. So there is room for error. We talked about how maybe he wasn't moved to the side because he made a mistake, rather they were trying to save him, trying to help him out. But this is a little bit different. So here we're going to see the story, and then I think it might be a little bit more clear. I wanted to sort of hear our thoughts before we got there, but that's okay. This is not saying that the congregation feels a certain way about the mistake that he made. This is actually talking about if he makes a mistake, what that means in terms of his prayer being accepted. So let's read the next section. Amru alav al Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. So Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is known as a healer. There's sort of like miraculous stories told about him where he lifts somebody up who was very, very ill, and all of a sudden, because of Rabbi Hanina's presence, this person was healed. So they say about Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa that he used to pray for the sick, and he would say, this one will die and this one will live. And they said to him, how do you know? Sorry, I stopped reading in Hebrew. Amrulo, minayin ata yodea, amar lahem im shigurat fileti befi yodea ani shehu mikubal. If you remember, that word shigura means like fluent, to come out like exactly right. V'im lav yodea ani shehu mitoraf. So they said to him, how do you know that this one will die and this one will live? And he said, if my prayer comes out fluently, I know that the prayer is accepted. But if my prayer does not come out fluently, if I make a mistake, I know that the prayer is rejected. I know that, so essentially, if the prayer comes out in a fluent manner, the person who he's praying for will live. And if the prayer comes out and it's not fluent, he knows that the person that he's praying for will not live.
Oy vey, oy vey.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So we've seen this word before, shigura, this idea about fluency, and really sort of having perfection. And I don't think it's necessarily a word that we use so much anymore, like in terms of prayer. We're not always concerned about perfection in the way that we used to be. Now, different maybe when you're reading from the Torah. And certainly we want the Hebrew to be correct, right? Because for those of you who are Hebrew speakers, sometimes if you put the emphasis on the wrong part of the word, you might say something completely different, right? And so we want to be as accurate as possible. But this is kind of a higher, this is like a higher belief. This is like the thing that comes out of my mouth was meant to be, right? Whatever it is that came out was meant to be, and it has like pretty harsh, pretty heavy implications for how the prayer can be accepted by God, basically. Oy vey. Any other reactions other than oy vey? Yeah, Marcia.
Now, when I heard that, I was thinking what he's saying is, I do not make the person live or the person dies. God makes the person live and the person dies. And the way that I try to engage God in this process is through my prayer. So it's very important how I say my prayer so that God will help in this manner. Otherwise, it sounds like the rabbi, has the ability to cause things to happen.
Okay, great. I like that. The only thing I would add to that is that if God holds the power to heal or to not heal, right? Then likely if this rabbi believes, and which many people do, and I think that that's an okay belief, that God is the healer, that God has the will and the power to heal or not to heal, that he also would believe that God has the power to make the words come out fluently or not, right? So God's kind of controlling everything. And so that to me is that's why I read it the way that I did, because God sort of holds ultimate power. And if God puts the words in my mouth, shigura, if he puts them in fluently, then I'm good to go and that person's going to live. That's a sign. We go back to the beginning of the text, siman. That's a sign that the person's going to live. And if he puts them in my mouth, mituraf, and they're mixed up, then we have a problem, or the person has a problem. Yeah. But I like that. I mean, it is definitely like handing over responsibility, and I think that is what they believed. I think that there is a belief that that God heals and God makes the decisions. I think God also empowers people to be able to pray, and then where you take it from there is kind of up to your own interpretation. I also think, there's a little bit of a conversation here about, it's not directly in the text, but sort of pulling out of it is like, what is the point of a prayer like the Mishnah Berakhot, right? Now, is God unaware? So I put a name on the Mishnah Berakhot, we all do. Is the point of that to make God aware that person is sick? Or is the point of that for our own, comfort? Or, right, because surely God knows the people in the world that are sick, if that's the way we perceive God. Sort of what's the point of those, we talk about this Mishnah particularly, like praying for sick, and healing versus not healing, and what the point of that even is. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that, about the Mishnah Berakhot, those of you who, participate in that ritual and find it to be meaningful. Sandra.
Well, I wondered about...
Your sound is all fixed. You're so crystal clear.
Oh, good. My son helped me.
Oh, good.
So anyway, I probably words are not the only thing that are referred to, what about Kadvanagh, the prayers Kadvanagh? I think in Mishnah Berakhot, maybe that's the point, that
Yeah.
we want positive energy directed towards the ill person.
That's great. Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's exactly right. And we've seen in the Mishnah that we've seen this conversation of Keva and Kavanah. And so I actually think, it might be easy sometimes to say, oh, the Talmud, the Mishnah, those people who wrote the Sidurim, they don't care about Kavanah because they're really just concerned about the structure of the prayer. But we've seen Mishnayot that have taught us actually otherwise, that they do care about the Kavanah. I don't know that the Kadvanagh is in this Mishnah because it's talking so specifically about, the mistakes or the exactness of the words and that being really important. But surely in Mishnah Berakhot, the way that we were just talking about it, surely the Mishnah Berakhot, you want to have Kadvanagh, absolutely, and that would be part of the point, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I personally don't believe that that putting a name on the Mishnah Berakhot is like giving God some sort of awareness that God didn't already have. I think that it is more about our own Kadvanagh and sort of making the community aware of people who are sick and reminding ourselves every day when we get to that point that person is sick. It's kind of like giving us an awareness to remember that that person is not well and that we should be checking on him or her, or could be bringing them food or serving them in some way. Bikor cholim essentially is kind of is the Kadvanagh behind putting names on that list. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Ellen.
Well, and I also think that I guess it is part of the Kadvanagh, but when you put a name on that list, you're invoking the support of the community for both the person who is ill and for you who is concerned about that person.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and so you're giving the community awareness as well. In our community and many, we use Hebrew names, but on our list it has both, because you don't always know somebody's Hebrew name. You don't always know who you're saying, and it's important to know who you're saying the prayer for, and people sort of can check in on one another, and that's definitely the point of it in our community. Yeah, Sandy.
Do the words make a difference?
It's a great question. The words of the actual prayer, the Mishnah Berakhot prayer. Yeah, I mean, well, what do you think?
Since I don't understand Hebrew, the words for me are the kind of rhythm and hearing the same words every time, and just having a place, as Ellen just talked about, to gather strength to support people who are ill.
Yeah.
So for me,
right.
I mean, the words are meaningful, but that's not where I'm focused.
Right. Yeah. The prayer essentially says exactly what you just said, which is, one who blesses the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rebecca, Sarah, Rachel, and Leah. Bless those in our community who are sick. And then we pause and we say all the names. And then it says, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, that you should restore and heal the body and soul. And, so it's not, you're saying you don't understand Hebrew, but you understand what that prayer is. I mean, it's basically saying the God who has taken care of us for all of our generations, heal the following people, essentially. And it is asking for healing. And also, by the way, it says, refuah shlema, a complete healing. And there's a lot of conversations about that as well, because we know that there are people on that Mishnah Berakhot list who aren't going to have a complete healing, right? We know that there are people who are chronically ill and who will be on the Mishnah Berakhot list forever, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean, and so that's another question, like, why continue to pray for that person? Well, because they should have comfort and they should have their name mentioned in the community so that, again, people are made aware of that. But your question goes back to the Mishnah, right? Which is, what happens if while I'm saying that prayer, I slip? Personally, I don't see so much meaning in that. The Mishnah would disagree with me. The Mishnah would say that I've, caused the tragedy of, on our list, 50 people. It's a big, a heavy load to carry. Yes, Irene.
You may not be able to answer this, but I seem to recall that Rabbi Lou, with regard to the Mishnah Berakhot, would tend to be upset if we brought in a name of someone who wasn't severely ill.
Hmm.
Does anyone else remember that? That you really have to reserve the prayer for the dying person, basically. Nobody remembers, so I must have misunderstood it.
So I certainly don't have context for that. It would surprise me. I think given, I mean, I don't know, Rabbi Lou's theology, but so I don't want to quote, but I would think that one would want somebody's, minor eye surgery to go as well as somebody's chemotherapy, right? Like you want somebody to have healing and feel good. So I think I would think that wouldn't be the case, but everybody has their own belief system around that.
That makes sense.
Ruth, make sure you unmute.
I've always wondered, say someone is undergoing chemotherapy, and then the chemotherapy is over. That doesn't mean the cancer is cured necessarily. How long do you keep the person on the Mishnah Berakhot list?
It's a great question. I think, so we have a friend on the Mishnah Berakhot list right now, on our Mishnah Berakhot list. My family has a friend, and she had a heart transplant, major surgery. We had her on the Mishnah Berakhot list, and actually my mom asked her, and she said, I want to be on there for a year. I want to feel like a year feels like I've been, I actually think in some ways it's good to ask the person. We actually just did this in our community. Beth and I went through the Mishnah Berakhot list and made a whole bunch of phone calls because there have been people that have been there, and I knew that person was on there for a minor foot surgery, right? Or something like that. And that person been there for over a year, and you want to call and say, hi, how are you feeling? Right? And that person said, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm still on the list, but thanks, but you can take me off the list. So I think it's a personal, I think that's part of the Kadvanagh of it, is it kind of allows you to have awareness of people, of how people are doing in their life, and actually allows you to think about, does that person want to stay on the list or not? And you can ask them. We've probably all been there, right? Where you've maybe wanted a prayer and then wanted to be taken off. Yeah, Ruth.
That's true, because I know I had my granddaughter on the list after she had knee surgery. And when I told her, and she was getting better, she said, no, take me off now.
Yeah. Some people can feel like it's a bad omen to be on there, right? Don't keep me on there too long, because I'm not sick anymore. Sandy.
Well, I was just going to say about Gary, who's been on that list for a long time, and thank God he doesn't have active cancer right now, but he has lingering symptoms and stuff. So for me, he says, you don't need to take care, have me there. But for me, it seems like the right thing to do, because there are some ups and downs that.
Right. So that goes back to the question of what's the point of the Mishnah Berakhot? Is it for you? Is it for them? Is it for the community? And just to take us back to the Mishnah and about the prayer leader, the prayer leader is sort of representing the community in that way, and it's our job to say the prayers correctly, whether that's because it helps with Kadvanagh or because that's the way that the prayers are answered. I personally believe that it's less about the sort of perfectionism piece, but I do think it's important to do your best to get the words right. And just to bring us back to the bigger conversation, because we're ending this chapter, the prayer leader is given, carries a lot of weight, and particularly in this time where, like I said, we assume that the prayer leader had one of the higher levels of fluency in the room, and was called upon essentially to pray for the entire community. So we see some of this language about, if he makes a mistake, he's kicked, he's moved to the side, or if he makes a mistake, his prayers aren't answered. And I think that it's not necessarily meant to be taken literally, though probably we understand that he was actually taken out, but more to understand the sort of the weight that one carries when one is a prayer leader. And I think that actually it's worthwhile to keep that frame of mind for a prayer leader, actually to sort of have that level of expectation when you're calling in somebody to pray for your community, that it's not just about voice, but also about, voice and performance, but it's also about fluency and sort of ability for people now to invoke some sort of Kadvanagh while also being true to the keppah, being true to the words. So any other thoughts about Shaliach Tzibor before we move on? We're going to totally shift gears. So we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the Shaliach Tzibor, but just if anybody had any last comments or questions. No? All right then. So we're going to go into chapter 6. Chapter 6, making this so we can see it. Chapter 6 of our Mishnah is all about food. So I don't actually know the way that they chose the order of these Mishnayot, but we are completely shifting gears. And we are going to get into the intricacies of blessing over food. So here we go. All right. I have to say, you should feel free, as always, to stop me and ask questions. There's not a lot of commentary around these Mishnayot. Like in the past few that we've seen, we're able to have questions about, well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean to you? There's not so much deep, there's not a lot of deep conversation about whether you're blessing over the tree or whether you're blessing over the ground. It kind of is pretty clear cut, but we'll go through. And if we have what to say, we'll definitely stop. Ketzad mevarchim al hapeirot. How does one bless over the produce? Peirot literally means fruit, but there's talking about a bigger category here. Al peirot ha'ilan omer borei pri ha'etz. So over the fruit of the tree, one says borei pri ha'etz, one who creates the fruit of the tree. Now we know that all these blessings start with Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and then the end of the bracha. And they don't put the whole blessing here. They just put the ending, so we know what we're talking about. Chutz min hayayin, except for wine. So sha'al hayayin omer borei pri hagefen, or hagafen in this case. So over the fruit of the tree, one says borei pri ha'etz, except for the blessing over the wine, which we know is borei pri hagafen. Ve'al peirot ha'aretz, so over produce of the ground. There we go. Omer borei pri ha'adama, one says who creates the fruit of the ground. Chutz min hapat, except for bread, over which one says sha'al hapat hu omer hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? So we have the fruit of the ground except for bread. Ve'al hayikarot omer borei pri ha'adama, over a vegetable, one says borei pri ha'adama, over the fruit of the ground. Rabbi Yehuda says borei minei deshanim. So Rabbi Yehuda says over the who creates diverse species of herbs. Okay, so that's probably the one you're not familiar with because we don't actually use that one anymore. There's a crazy argument in the, commentary on this. And I'm showing it to you for the sake of you seeing the intricacies of this conversation, not so that we can completely understand every word because it's wacky. Okay, so here's this conversation about borei minei deshanim. You can see here that this is called the dibor hamatchil, the word that they're sort of bouncing off of, the word that they're commentating on. Since there is in the midst the fruit of the ground, quote, herbs and seeds such as pulse. Anybody know what pulse is? Oh, that's good. I had to look it up too. It's all that stuff that's at the top. That picture there, it's like the dried seeds of grains, I guess, particularly if a grain is dry. So that's what it looks like. Rabbi Yehuda requires a recognized blessing for this particular type of grain. That's what borei minei deshanim actually is. But the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, so we don't actually use that blessing. But since it teaches in the Mishnah that on vegetables we recite who creates the fruit of the ground, these kind of vegetables, where it is customary to eat them raw, and he ate them raw, or where it is customary to eat them cooked, and he ate them cooked. But those vegetables where it was customary to eat them raw and he ate them cooked, or conversely, where it was customary to eat them cooked and he ate them raw, he only recites the blessing Shehakol for all things. So Shehakol is we'll see in the next Mishnah, is the kind of, is this one it's for everything. It's kind of like a default blessing in a way. All those vegetables that we eat either raw or cooked, we make the blessing who creates the food of the ground, Borei Pri Ha'adama, whether he ate them raw or cooked. It's like this crazy argument, like trying to understand where Rabbi Yehuda may have been coming from, and whether the blessing changes, whether the fruit or the produce is cooked or raw. And ultimately, the answer is that we don't go with him, right? Probably we understand why we don't go with him. That would drive people insane. Is the carrot cooked or is the carrot raw? Is the carrot meant to be cooked or is the carrot meant to be raw? Should we be eating it cooked or should we be eating it raw? I mean, there are a few vegetables, right, which you probably know, like you'd rather eat a potato cooked than raw, right? But there are many vegetables that could go either way. And so we kind of threw all of that conversation away. Now, in this particular case, in terms of the pulse, which is why he had that argument in the first place, you wouldn't eat a bean unless you cooked it, right? You wouldn't eat like whatever this is, lentils, the things that are on the top of that screen. You wouldn't eat those things. You wouldn't eat them raw. And so he was saying that there's actually a special category for these types of things where it could be either that they only are able to be eaten one way. And the halakha said, Rabbi Yehuda, you lose. It's too crazy. We're going to go with these brachot. Okay, so the brachot that we've discovered this morning, you've probably heard them before, most of them. Borei Pri Ha'etz, except for wine. Why might wine be different? So why? Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
Well, it's a fruit, but you drink it. You turn it into a drink.
That's right. Yeah. So it's more of a drink. Yeah, Marcia.
It's
Ernie, go ahead.
It's more than the juice of the wine. It is fermented. So there's a human intervention.
Okay, great. So there's something's been done to it in order to get it into its state. Okay, great.
Because we don't say it over fruit juice. We say it over ferment. You have to have the ferment.
Right. And we're going to see in the next Mishnah, or maybe in 2, what happens after that, right? So now first it's grapes, then it's wine, then it's vinegar. And we have a problem when it's vinegar. Yeah, Iren.
Maybe it's because it's not really for children.
Okay, maybe it's because it's not really for children. Maybe. It's like a warning sign. If I say Borei Pri Hagafen, it means the children can't have it. I don't know that that's always true. I think sometimes children get a little thimble of wine on Shabbat. Not my child. Yes, Marcia.
Well, I think it's the same thing as Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. It's the bread, and it's the fruit of the vine. It has a special sanctification. It has a special place. Right. It's not just used for drinking. It's used for sanctifying. Just like bread is a stand-in for all food, all food that right. You eat. We could say the ha'adama over bread, but we don't, because it has a separate meaning to us.
Right, and I would argue that hamotzi fits in the same category as what Ernie was talking about. So we're not blessing the grain. We're talking about the thing that came out of the grain. So the bread didn't come out of the ground, really. The grain came out of the ground, and then we humans did something with it to make it something holy or something different. Sandra.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing, that wine is used for sacramental purposes. But my question is, when we say a bracha, sometimes for Havdalah, you say, if you have grape juices, it's okay. And you've given us grape juice in our bags. So, and we use that for the bracha. So how do you understand that?
I think that we understand. So I think that that's kind of actually a Kadvanagh thing, which is that we understand that nowadays not everybody drinks wine. So then, actually wine was pretty much the only thing that people drank. It was people didn't drink water or juice or soda, right? There weren't other kinds of things. So it was really the only kind of drink. So basically what you had was you had fruit and produce, and then you had beverage, and beverage was wine. And so it has its own bracha. Even children, drank wine because it wasn't considered like alcoholic in the way that we think about it now. It was just, there was fruit and produce, and then there was there was drink. So I think somebody had said that, well, it's a drink, it's not a fruit. And so that's why. And now we understand it to be part of ritual. So at almost every joyous occasion, a wedding, a Brit Milah, a Havdalah, Kiddush, right? At every sort of joyful moment, community gathering, etc., that has a ritual, we say Kiddush. We bless over the wine. And at our congregation, there's a minchag to also say shehakol, because some people don't bless over wine and Kiddush, they bless over tequila or schnapps or something else, right? But in terms of the grape juice, I think that's a modern, I don't know, interpretation, but it's essentially that we don't want to give children wine, right? And so we substitute for grape juice. And then there are a lot of people that decide to drink grape juice as well. And you want to say the bracha that is for Shabbat, or in this case, Havdalah, and that's Borei Pri Hagafen. Okay, any other questions? So we have the sort of central blessings that we know that we say over these different food groups. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, so we'll move to the next one. Thank you, Ellen, for the definition of pulse. I'll look it up later, but I looked it up last night because I had no idea. Okay. Berach al perot ha'ilan borei pri ha'adama yatsa. So now we're going to get into the conversation of yatsa and lo yatsa, which we've learned before, that you've fulfilled your obligation or you've not fulfilled your obligation. So this kind of adds a layer to blessings, right? That it's not just because we want to say a blessing, but that actually we're commanded to say brachot over our food. And then the question is, if you essentially saying the wrong one, well, what if it's, a stew or something like that? And there's fruit and there's vegetables in here. Which one do we do? And which one do we prioritize? And if you say this blessing over that one, and it was supposed to be the other way around, what happens? And that's this conversation. Okay, so berach al perot ha'ilan, borei pri ha'adama yatsa. If one blessed over the fruit of the tree, and he says, who creates the fruit of the ground, one has fulfilled one's obligation. Ve'al perot ha'aretz borei pri ha'etz lo yatsa. But if one says over produce from the ground, who creates the fruit of the tree, one has not fulfilled his obligation. So you can see it works in one way, but it doesn't work in the other way. Al kulam imamar shehakol nihiyeh yatsa. Over anything, one says, by whose word all things exist, one has fulfilled his obligation. So shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro is the, as I just said in the last Mishnah, is like the default blessing. It kind of covers everything. Now you might wonder, well, then why don't we just say it for everything? Why do we even have all these brachot? Maybe you have an answer for that. But the shehakol is the default. But let's start from the top of this Mishnah. If one blesses, oh, did I share the screen? Can you see? Oh, sorry. I realized I could see all of you, so that means that you couldn't see the screen. Okay, there you go. Okay, so I'll just leave it there for 1 second so you can take a look. So if you bless over the tree if the fruit is of the tree, but you say it's of the ground, you're good. You're okay. You've fulfilled. If the produce is from the ground and you say it's from the tree, you've not fulfilled. Anybody out there logical enough to figure this out? Why that might be the case? Take a stab at it. Ellen.
Well, the tree grows from the ground.
There you go. Right. That's right. So trees grow from the ground. So so there's kind of a loophole there that says, well, the tree grew from the ground, so therefore the fruit kind of grew from the ground. But you can't say that something came from the ground if it didn't come from the ground at all, right? So things that go from the ground without being from trees, like a potato or a cucumber or whatever else that come from the ground, you can't say that they came from the ground if they didn't come from the ground. Pretty straightforward, right? And then again, at the very end, we get shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro, we get this sort of default blessing. So I asked the question, and there's not necessarily an answer, but I asked the question of, why wouldn't you just say that default all the time? to sort of cover your basis, right? We say shahakol over water. We say shahakol over non-wine beverages. Essentially, we say shahakol over non-wine beverages, right? So we over cocktails or over liquors and probably juices now, if you were to say a blessing over a juice. Yeah, so why wouldn't you do that? I think for me, it's about the awareness of it. You know, if you're sitting down to a meal and you have all these things in front of you, it's kind of like, oh, you have to think about where things come from. So there's some sort of Kadvanagh behind that, some sort of awareness. I don't know, any other thoughts about the sort of, you know, detail of the different blessings? Yeah, Ernie.
Well, it's interesting that we don't have a specific blessing for Mayim, because water is so essential. I mean, people fight wars over water. You can live without food longer than you can live without water. So it is so essential. It would seem there should be a specific blessing for Mayim.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, something that I don't know the answer to, but I wonder when water, in the form that we know it today, not just as a liquid to something else, right? Because I was saying before that the central beverage in the Mishnah time, in the times of the Mishnah, with wine, surely it was meant both for, you know, ritual and for hydration. But I wonder when we sort of moved away from that and actually started to drink water in its purest form, and why there wasn't a blessing, you know, designated for that. We know that we pray for rain. We talked about that in the last couple of Mishnayot, but there's not actually a blessing for when we drink it. Irene.
Maybe because water is in everything.
Okay, because like water is in a cucumber and water is in lettuce, like water is in everything anyway, so it's kind of in all of the, yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, great. Anybody else? Yeah, Ellen.
I was thinking about why there are these different blessings, and I think one function of it, at least for me, is that it helps me appreciate the diversity of all these things and how amazing creation really is.
Yeah, that we can get fruit from a tree and get fruit from the ground and, you know, produce and all, and make bread out of grain and things like that. Yeah, it's definitely calls awareness and appreciation for different ways of acquiring the things that we eat, definitely. But I like that there's a shehakol, right? So I like that there's diversity, and I like that there's a specificity in which we like that we really have to think about the brachot before we say them. Which one? Where is this from? Where is this from? But I also like that there's shehakol. Like that was very thoughtful, right? Because surely you're going to end up in a situation where you're not sure, or this blessing doesn't totally cover that, right? And there is discussion. We'll see in a minute. There is discussion about, well, what happens if you have all of these things? You know, is there a hierarchy? And there's like, and then there's kind of leaves it up to you in some way. Like you have to decide, well, is this a bean stew with, this is a bad example, but is this a bean stew with lentils, or is this a lentil stew with beans, right? Like what's taking up the most, the majority of the food? Which one are we going to choose? Because typically we don't say that, we wouldn't say all of them. Like mizonot, for example, which is not in the Mishnah, is over cookies and cakes. Like we say that. So I remember growing up in Hebrew school, we used to not say hamotzi, because at Kiddush in the Hebrew school, not in the congregation, but in the Hebrew school, we would be given juice and cookies, and we didn't necessarily have challah. So we would say mizonot. We wouldn't say motzi. And so that's kind of like a very specific bracha. You're like really looking at what you're eating, and you're saying, oh, this isn't actually bread. This isn't challah. And so it's a very specific kind of blessing. Great. All right, let's try to do one more before I have to jet. Let's see. And this time I'll show it to you. You can always feel free to wave your hands at me if I forget to do that, because I'm looking at two screens. Okay. Okay. So this is just essentially completing the one that we saw before, talking about other categories. Al devar she'ein gidulo min haaretz omer shehakol. Over anything which does not grow from the earth, one says shehakol. Like meat, fish, cheese, milk, things that are not growing produce either from a tree or from the ground, you say shehakol. So it's interesting, right? It's kind of like we're only focusing on things that grow directly from the earth. So we can come back to that. Al hachometz ve'al hanovlot ve'al hagovai omer shehakol. Over vinegar, over fallen unripe fruit and locusts, one says by whose word all exist. But one says shehakol. We'll come back to that because I'm sure there are questions about what those categories are. Al hachalab ve'al gvina ve'al beitzim omer shehakol. Over milk and cheese and eggs, one says shehakol. And Rabbi Yehuda says, oops, where'd it go? Rabbi Yehuda omer kol shehu min klala ein mivarchim alav. Rabbi Yehuda says over anything which is cursed, they do not bless it at all. Okay. I remember this came up once in a conversation. Hi, Rita. Hi, I'll be there in 1 second. Okay. We talked about, I remember, I don't know where we were, I think we were talking about it in the morning's blessings class. And so I'm working backwards now from that very last comment. Somebody said, we were talking about Birkat Hamazon. We were talking about the bracha after you eat. And somebody asked, if you ate a food and it made you sick, do you still have to thank God for it? Right? That is like question of like, okay, what if there's something wrong with the food? But first, let me just go from the top. So over anything that doesn't grow from the earth, meat, fish, cheese, milk, etc., shehakol, pretty straightforward, right? Now, there are, in the second section, we have vinegar, fallen unripe fruit, and locusts. And actually, those three are considered, at least in this Mishnah, those three are considered cursed, which is how Rabbi Yehuda gets to what he's talking about. And if I had more time, I would open it up and ask you, well, why do you think it's cursed? But I'm just going to tell you. So vinegar is cursed because it's spoiled wine. So Ernie kind of led us to that in the last Mishnah. Grapes go to wine, and when wine is no longer good, it goes to vinegar. And so in the Mishnah, they consider this to be something gross. They didn't yet know that vinegar could be, used in other ways of cooking and salad dressings and things like that. It was like, oh, they tasted the wine and it tasted like vinegar. It felt like it was, or tasted like it was spoiled. And so they would not say a blessing over vinegar. Fallen unripe fruit, they can be eaten, but they're cursed essentially because they didn't stay on the tree as long as they were supposed to, right? So it was not quite ready yet, got, I don't know, knocked off or something like that. It wasn't quite ready to be eaten, but it fell off. Similar, like probably an apple that falls off too early is like very, very tart. You could imagine other things falling off and being quite bitter, kind of like vinegar. So this idea that if it fell off too soon, you wouldn't say the blessing over it necessarily because, but here it's, so here there's a controversy, right? Rabbi Yehuda is saying you don't actually bless over these things, but in the Mishnah, we're given these three categories and we're told it's okay to say shehakol over them. So it's kind of a machloket. And then the third one is locust. Locust is a very strange categorical piece here because certain kinds of locusts can be kosher, apparently, and can be eaten. But the reason that they're cursed is because they eat the crops. So they're considered not to be something that we want around because they destroy our crops. So in the Mishnah, in the first part, the vinegar, the fallen unripe fruit, and the locust, if you come across those three things, you should acknowledge that maybe they're not, the most tasty, but you would say shehakol on them anyway. And Rabbi Yehuda, who often takes the unpopular opinion, says actually you shouldn't say a blessing over any of those things. We know now that we say a blessing over anything that we put into our mouth. So we over vinegar, we do say a bracha. For those of you who eat locusts, you would say a bracha, though I wouldn't recommend it. And sometimes you probably eat unripe fruit, right? Like it's not always the most. We don't know now if it's fallen off before or not. Sometimes I guess you can tell a little bit, but we're not out there picking our own fruit generally, so you wouldn't necessarily know. And then you say that bracha. Questions? Yeah, Iren.
Chocolate?
Chocolate?
Yes. What?
Very important question. Shehakol.
Chocolate.
Yeah. This is the point of the class where you just call out your favorite foods and make sure you have the blessing right. Ice cream, shehakol. Any other questions? Okay, so these are pretty specific Mishnayot. Actually, when we continue, we'll continue next week. This is actually good as you head into your Thanksgiving. You're now aware of all the brachot that you need to say over all the different foods that are on your table. So next week we'll continue. Thank you for being flexible with me, and we'll continue in this conversation of brachot and which brachot to say, and particularly when things get mixed up or when there might be like a hierarchy question. Well, if we have these three things, you know, where do we start and where do we bless first? I always there was always a funny moment, and this was about Birkat HaMazon in rabbinical school. Rabbi Dorff used to say, and maybe I've shared this with you before, if you have 2 pieces of pizza at lunch, you don't have to say the full Birkat HaMazon. But if you have 3, that's a full meal, and then you definitely have to say the full Birkat HaMazon, right? So it's all up for interpretation. Anyway, yeah, Ernie.
Thursday morning, is there minyan at 7:30 and then a bar mitzvah at 9?
No. So